Welcome to the first video in the Small Business Counselor video series. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that go into setting up a business. First off, we're going to talk a little bit about deciding which entity to use. The areas or issues that we're going to discuss related to entity selection are: what is the tax situation of the business? What are the business's liabilities and assets? And what is the ownership and management situation of the business? Now, issues related to the tax situation are broad and comprehensive. I just want to touch on a couple issues that small business owners face and generally discuss why you look out for these when you're selecting a business entity. First, a business entity needs to look at what the business will own. What are the assets of that business relative to the tax situation? Now, what do I mean when I say that? Well, what I mean is, does the business own any physical property? And are you planning on taking any deductible expenses related to that physical property? Deductions vary based on the type of entity that you've selected for your business. So the deduction for your property might be distinct if you're set up as a sole proprietorship or if you're set up as a limited liability company. It's also important to recognize whether or not your business has employees. That will impact the type of deductions and type of tax structure that you need to be aware of relative to your business. The second area that you want to review as you're preparing to set up your business is, what are the liabilities and assets of that business venture? Different businesses have different liabilities and different assets. For example, a construction company will need to worry about liabilities relative to its employees and to its workers. It'll need to worry about liabilities related to permitting, construction accidents, workers' compensation, and that may be distinct from a service business that will not have the same liabilities and may not own the same types of properties. So you need to think about your business in this regard. First, what will the company own and what will be the assets of the owners? What does this mean? Well, when you set up a business, one of the key elements that you want to look at is, how do I separate liabilities and assets? You do not want the assets of the business owner to be caught up in the liabilities of the business. That's why people set up as corporations and limited liability companies. What that does is it puts all of the liability of the business in the business entity, and that separates it from the liabilities of the business owners. So if you're in an industry where there's high liability, you want to make sure that you use an entity that makes that separation, like a limited liability company or a corporation. You're also going to want to look at what are the assets that that company will hold. This is important because if you're in an industry that owns a lot of assets, say you have a warehouse that carries a large inventory, you're going to want to make sure that that's protected by the corporate structure. You're going to want to make sure that that's separate from any personal liabilities that the owners may have. You're also going to want to be aware of whether or not your business is engaged in several different ventures. For example, say I'm a business owner and I own a restaurant and I own a dry cleaning shop. Those two business ventures have different liabilities and different assets. You're going to want to make sure that you have a business structure that separates those as cleanly as possible. If both of those are operating under the same corporate structure, what may happen there is a liability in the restaurant may cause problems with assets of the dry cleaning business. That's where businesses need to look at potentially setting up with joint ventures or setting up with a parent company and using subsidiaries for the respective business ventures. The third area that you need to review when setting up your business is, what will the ownership and management structure be of that business? This is important for business entity selection because, for example, to do an S corporation, all of the owners need to be either U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. So if you're in industry, especially in an international business, and you want to bring in foreign investors, you're foreclosed from being able to use the S corporation structure, and you need to use one of the other business ventures. You're also going to need to reflect on what is the amount of investment going into that business. Each entity type protects or holds assets in different ways. So the greater the investment, the more complex the business structure will be. You also need to recognize what is the complexity of the business venture itself. When you're setting up your business, you need to look at, well, what is the level of governance that goes into this business? Is it going to be owners with a board of directors and officers with employees and other individuals working on the behalf of the business? If you have a very complex business structure, the type of entity that you use impacts what you can do within that business. Also, you're going to want to pay attention to what the relationship is between the management of the company and the ownership of the company. When I say that, what I mean is oftentimes you'll see a small business where there's 3 owners to that business who also act as the board of directors, who also act as the officers, such as the president, vice president of that company. In that situation, there are different liabilities and different concerns based on how that individual is acting. So when I'm acting in the board of director position, that's different than when I'm acting as president or when I'm acting as shareholder. And this can become complicated in a small business situation when it's a single individual that's acting in each of those roles. A final element that you need to consider when looking at the ownership and management of the company is what is the projection for growth and expansion in that business. If you feel like you're in an industry where growth will either be quick or where you're going to have to make requests from investments, you're going to want to make sure that you're set up with a proper business entity that can grow and that can issue either shares of stock or membership interests in a fluid and a quick way. Every business owner needs to be aware of these critical elements. What is my tax situation? What are my liabilities and assets? And what is the ownership and management structure that I want to use when I set up my business? All the best in all your business ventures. I hope this information helps.